I think when Zohran Mamdani first caught my attention, I was just like, who is this guy? And my first hurdle was definitely convincing my editors that, no, we need to do this story right now, because I think as a digital native, it was clear, he didn't have the resonance that a typical establishment candidate would have. When he was first starting to get my attention, he was polling at 1%, and yet I could tell that something was happening, really because he was going viral, to put it succinctly. And I think there's this phrase that Twitter is not real life, but I think we're living in this moment where Twitter is more real than real life is, where it's dictating our reality. He had gone viral, and in ways that were very digital first. Like, it wasn't really about his policies, it was about the way he was framing them. For example, one of the first times he went viral was he did what's called a polar plunge, and he was wearing a full suit at this time, and he was using it as an opportunity to say, I'm freezing, let's freeze the rent. It was the middle of winter. And so he wasn't necessarily going viral for his policy of freezing the rent. It was this really interesting presentation. And I started to realize, wow, he really has potential here. Leading up to the election, this was an interesting moment for me personally, because I really felt like Mamdani was going to win the Democratic nomination. But I haven't been a reporter through that many elections, and so I didn't really trust my gut. I really felt like it was going to be Zohran, but I was fielding all these questions from colleagues or just people I know in my personal life. Basically, anyone who's 40 and above was like, yeah, but he's not gonna win, right? What about the donors? And it reminded me so much of 2016, when I personally thought that there was no way that Trump was going to win. It was, the same conversation about the donors. He's not serious. It doesn't matter that he's getting all these views on social media. That's social media. But I really felt like there was something palpable here. By election day for the primary, he had an army of more than 50,000 volunteers. And so I went to some of these events where it didn't feel like community service. It didn't feel like, oh, I have to be here right now. These were young, cool people, girls who, they, thems, who maybe threw on some eyeliner for the first time in a long time and were there to meet some boys. It was this interesting mix of social and politics, where people really wanted to be there. And then on election night, ultimately, there were parties across the city where basically everyone who's anyone was absolutely on fire celebrating his victory. And so I felt like there was a movement unfolding where it was becoming a social currency to align yourself with Zohran. I think that young people are turning to Zohran because of a few reasons. I think that, one, this is a generation and an age group that was primed by Black Lives Matter, which I think is also why they've had such an easy time adopting anti-Israel stances and sometimes anti-Semitism, because they really have this worldview of oppressor versus oppressed. But in a post-BLM moment, it's way less in vogue to speak directly about race. And that's something that's interesting about Zohran, is that he does mention race. And, I've done a deep dive on his social media. And so it's definitely something he thinks about often, but he is speaking more directly in economic terms and in class terms. And so they have kind of evolved to apply this BLM worldview but it still is the same social justice politics, just reborn. There are probably two types of Zohran voters. The caricature of a Zohran voter, which definitely is real, is college educated, white, maybe mixed race, but affluent, makes over $100,000, probably like $100,000 to $150,000. And a lot of his campaign staff went to places like Yale. Also definitely posted a black square during the Black Lives Matter movement. The other is an actual lower income resident of New York City, maybe a taxi driver, a lot of Muslim immigrants, South Asian immigrants. And so his coalition is actually quite diverse. Jews make up a meaningful portion of that too. The latest numbers that I've seen show that he has the support from something like 20% of Jewish voters in New York, which is really wild when you think about the fact that Zohran believes that Israel is like a genocidal, fascistic state that needs to be dissolved and become Palestine. I think that it's very easy to caricature his supporters as like spoiled brats, like the aggrieved Columbia University student. But the thing to note here is that say you make the top of that income bracket, say you make $150,000 a year here in New York City, you are not on a track to home ownership at all. I suppose if you are really smart and you're like, I'm gonna buy a studio in this neighborhood in the Bronx or something, but like for most parts of the city, definitely if you wanna raise a family, that's not viable on $150,000. And so I think that these are voters who do see themselves as part of the working class, despite how ridiculous that might seem if you say you went to Yale, but they don't see a path forward. And I think that that is what makes them open to socialism, because the essential divide, that even gave rise to socialism during industrialization was this divide between people who own property and people who don't. And that's kind of what's happening in a similar way now, where these young New Yorkers are looking around, realizing there's basically no shot in hell that they're going to own property. So I think that makes them open to things like the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, which is a bona fide force here in New York. One question I've been asking myself a lot is, does this say more about the state of the Democratic Party, or is this just a New York story? And the more that I think about it, I think that this is a national story. I think that this is really about the death of the establishment within the Democratic Party. I think we are finally seeing the left start to gather its own populist politics in response to Trump. And so why I think it does have national implications and speak to what people want nationally is because, A, just personally, as I've traveled throughout the past month or so, reporting on other stories, like I met this handyman in Florida who literally could talk to me about Zohran Mamdani for 1 hour. And I was like, why do you know as much about Zohran as I do? And so, it's airing nationally on network TV. Joe Rogan happened to have mentioned Zohran. A lot of podcasts are covering Zohran. But then also when you look at national polling, I forget what the numbers are, but it's definitely a majority of Democrats want to see leadership change. And also a lot of the attitudes that he holds say about Israel, that Israel is committing a genocide. Well, when you look at polling of young people, a lot of Gen Z believes that, especially Gen Z Americans who identify as Democrats. And so I don't know that he will be the one to kind of ride this wave nationally, but I think it shows that there's appetite here. Look at AOC. She accompanied Bernie on these rallies throughout America, some of which were in traditionally red counties, and they brought out like tens of thousands of people on the Fighting Oligarchy tour. So, you know, the right has MAGA. I definitely sense that the left wants something more progressive. It's interesting because I think for a long time after Democrats have lost an election, they've often said it's because we didn't go far left enough. And the right has really laughed at that and been like, the path is moderation. I actually think that we're starting to realize their self-analysis is right, that increasingly the average Democratic voter, except for the boomers, the boomers don't understand what has happened to their party. I don't think they've gotten the memo. But basically everyone but the boomers, I think, wants major reform and wants a much bigger social safety net, a much bigger public sector, a lot more governmental regulation, higher taxes on both corporations and the individuals. And so I do think that Zohran Mamdani, though it is a local news story, I think that there are implications here that go far beyond Zohran.
Bold in their determination to learn, in their resourcefulness to solve problems, and in their resilience to persevere. These are the marks of today's Christian leaders. Cornerstone students are not only tomorrow's leaders, they are today's Christian influencers, serving on the front lines of healthcare, business, ministry, and so much more. Boldly loving as they live into their calling. Boldly leading with wisdom and influence while forging new pathways in our world. And boldly living out their faith in Jesus Christ, our greatest influencer. Bold, Christ-centered, influential. We are Cornerstone University.